Sorry, Matt.
It's okay. That's okay. We good to go?
Good to go.
Brilliant. So I was asked to do a bit of an overview of transactional analysis, and it's really depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. Appreciating that a number of people on the call have probably used various aspects of transactional analysis in various contexts. So happy to have you chime in or add or expand if you'd like, or even challenge if I've got it a little bit off. So just show of hands, how many people have come across this concept of transactional analysis? Right. So basically what transactional analysis is, comes from the 60s by a guy named Eric Berne, who was a psychiatrist trying to find a simplifying and unifying way that helps people understand why people behave and think and interact the way they do, with the idea that we can intervene and fix pathology was its original approach, and then it's evolved into kind of leadership and performance-based stuff. But he tried to take the reigning theories at the time, which was behavioral therapy, or behavioral kind of conditioning, neuroscience as it was in the 60s, and psychodynamic humanistic type approaches, and trying to make a unifying theory, and came up with a fairly accessible approach that got a lot of attention in the 60s and 70s, somewhat frowned upon in the academic worlds, and then it doesn't hold up as academically, but it's very user friendly. So and please stop me along the way if you've got any questions. Three fundamental aspects of transactional analysis that I'll kind of quickly touch on, that kind of depends on the layer that you want to look at. So something called life positions, which are essentially the fundamental beliefs about ourselves and how we relate to the world. And these particularly established when we're early, and they guide how we interact and choose to deal with the world, and which pulls us into the ego states, which are learned ways or frames or scripts on how we learn to interact with other people in the world. And there's three of those. And by being aware of those and how they interact, we can choose to do something different. And then rackets and games, ego states and transactions are individual kind of interactions. Rackets and games are kind of the symphony that's made out of them. How do they play out, and what are some of the patterns and routines that both help us and hinder us? So to use Actrua or switch on language, it's really looking at transactional analysis is looking at what are the learned beliefs and behaviors that we have picked up and absorbed over time that either help us stay above the line or below the line. In a lot of the Burns work, it was looking more at what are the things that keep people stuck below the line, with the idea of being moving above the line. So that makes sense so far?
Yep.
So life positions, quite simply, and you can really drill into this, and there's all kinds of academic papers that pull this apart, but basically it's looking at how do we see ourselves versus the world, and do we see ourselves as okay, and do we see the world as okay? And depending on how these play out, it serves as a foundation of how we see and interpret the world, and there's set patterns and challenges. So am I okay, or is the world okay? And there's four, as all consultants like, a four module component. So there's the one, I'm okay, you're not okay. There's an argument that people are born with this. We're born with the idea that we are okay, but the world's not okay. And depend on how we're raised and what we experience, particularly in the first 10 years of life, we learn whether or not the world's okay, it'll meet our needs, or not okay. And we ingrain that subconsciously and use that in how we relate to the world from there on out. Then there's the I'm not okay, you're okay. So we learn pretty quickly that I can't cope or otherwise, but I can rely on others, and I'm quite dependent on others. There's the I'm not okay, you're not okay frame, which is a core of many, or argued a core of many severe psychosis. Basically, you can't rely on anything yourself. You don't know anything. The world's not okay, so you're basically screwed. That's very simplistic, but and then the one that we're trying to operate, or you try to the healthy one, if you will, the above the line one, is I'm okay and you're okay. Now, these are the fundamental beliefs that you're building on, and then based on that, you choose to interact with the world. And Byrne had a look at, what are the templates that we build on or use to interact with others in the world, and this is where ego states came into place. And his point of view was, well, if you look at how we learn to interact with the world, there's three basic ways we learn to interact with the world. We see children, we experience it. We as a child, we feel things, we have desires, and we kind of know that internally. We watch, we watch what adults do or what our parents do, and they tell us what to do and what not to do and the rules, and we ingrain that. And then we see other adults interact and make decisions. So his argument was there's three ego states or way of interacting in the world. There's the parent, adult, and the child. For those people that like in their spare time to read Freud and Jung and all those, you'll notice there's quite a parallel with this, because I'm sure there's a lot of you out there, between id, ego, and superego. Parent is basically the shoulds and the rules. Child is the id, the raw emotion, and the adult is the ego in between that manages the two. From a transactional analysis, basically saying the parent and the child are based on previous experiences and learned patterns. The healthy approach is the adult. The adult is the here and now. It's situational focused, and it's where we can make choices. So, the preferred operation style is to be adult. That takes some conscious intentionality behind it. Our reaction or our kind of learned behaviors tend to act from either a parent or a child point of view. And there can be either a hindering way or a helpful way to do that. And really, like above and below the line, we've got to know what our goal is before we can decide what's helpful and hindering. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. Yep.
So based on these three ego states, that's an individual. They've got to interact with someone else. So this is where transactional analysis gets its core focus, and this is where a lot of the attention has been put on understanding how do we interact with people. So there's a person who has to interact with another person. So a stimulus and a response. And the inertia of interactions is based on these these learnings, or how we've learned to interact in the world and how the world should work. Transactions want to be complementary. There's an inertia. Our brain is built to kind of thrive on complementary transactions. And what I mean by that is, maybe someone says, can you tell me what time it is? That's an adult question. An adult response would be, why, yes, it's 4:30. Can you see that's an adult-to-adult conversation? Because they're parallel, that's complementary. That's the desired state. And that conversation and the energy involved could keep going and going and going. Okay? There can also be, the parent-child say, it's time to go to bed. Please, can I just finish? That's complementary as well. Or the child-parent, can you help me with this? And the parent comes in and helps. Yes, what you need to do is this. Again, that conversation can go kind of on and on. Where it starts to get difficult, or those conversations where you walk away going, what the hell just happened? Has anybody been in one of those conversations where what was being said was one thing, but what you were experiencing, you walked away and goes, what just happened?
Never.
Never happens. Never. This is what we call cross transactions, and these tend to cause confusions and issues, and tend to be in the pathology world, tend to be what gets in the way a lot of times. So the first kind of goal in Byrne's way was, look, what are those weird conversations, and let's look at what's happening so that you can shine the light on what are some of the learned patterns, and then being awareness is somewhat curative. Now, there has to be action with awareness, but the first bit is to be aware, because all this happens subconsciously. So can you tell me what time it is? Is an adult reaction. Then you may have someone come very parent and very authority. You're always late. Why would you even care? These. Can you kind of see what that reaction would be like?
Mm.
Yeah. Now, this is only the challenge with transactional analysis is it's an individual transaction. Communication rarely happens in one single transaction. It's a symphony or a connection of multiple transactions that go up and down, and that's one of the limitations that's been criticized around this. Now, another way, can you tell me what time it is? This is one that I'm getting quite a bit with my son at the moment. Why are you always rushing me? Let me go, all that kind of stuff. Now, the reason why cross transactions are important is, one, it gives you an answer that there's something there. But our brain, or at least according to Byrne, our brain wants to kind of drive back to complementary transactions. So if we're if someone's treating us as a parent, you know, and we're trying to be an adult, our tendency, if we're not careful, is to operate as a child, yeah? Or vice versa. So let me put this in the context. This is where I use this quite a bit within the switch on space. Safety as an institution has largely become from a parental perspective. We take skilled, confident workers, we put them out there, we go through a lot of effort to make sure that they've got the abilities and skills. But then when we put them out in their roles, there's an element that the institution doesn't quite trust them, so we have to micromanage them all the time. We're always checking up on them, we're over proceduralizing, all that kind of stuff. So we're essentially treating them like children. Yeah. Now, if that happens long enough and there's enough emotions and frustrations, what's an adult going to start to act like? If they're always being treated like a child, they're going to start to kind of respond like a child and engage in really childish behaviors. A classic one, an example that I use a lot in Switch On, is worked on a Borg site once where they had a big issue about eyewear because it was really dusty, it was dry, and they were getting a lot of eye injuries. So anytime they were outside the mess hall, they had to wear eyewear. But it was hot, it was humid, and it just wasn't overly functional. But they took a very parental approach that anytime anybody was out there without eyewear, they got on them and they chipped them. So one guy, great Aussie kind of humor or mentality, decided, well, I'm not going to let the authority get me down. So he found a pair of eyewear, safety glasses, popped the lenses out, put the frames on, and walked around site looking for a fight, essentially. Because he was still complying, but it wasn't quite he was operating more from a child point of view. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Cool. And again, are you an idiot? What do you expect people to say? You know, for most people, that the automatic reaction would be from a child point of view. You know, you do it then, or if you know everything, what are you going to do? The goal here, or kind of the intervention, if you will, is to approach it from a more of an adult way. So, you know, if we're going to work together, we need to communicate better. So the more we can approach it adult, it tends to pull the transaction to parallel. Now, in theory, on paper, it sounds great. When you add real emotions and everything else, and keeping in mind the very nature of this, it's all subconscious. It's a lot harder than it looks. If that makes sense.
Miles, can I just share an example? This morning on the news, on the Today Show, they had Gladys, I won't try her surname, the New South Wales Premier, on, and Carl was talking to her, and he said to her, "Wow, it's getting really emotional, this whole border war, isn't it?" And she goes, "I don't know what you're talking about, Carl." She said, "No, it's not getting emotional at all." He said, "We're just having, proper adult conversations about it." He said, "Oh, how do you get on with the Queensland Premier?" He said, "Famously." He said, we are allowed to have different opinions. We challenge each other's opinions, but we get on really well. And I just thought, well done to her. He was trying to bring down, to a child, and she just come in straight down the line, adult. It was awesome.
Yeah. And that's, oh, sorry, Nigel, go.
No, I was going to add to that. The media love that child interaction. So that's where the emotion sits, is with the media, not with the, yeah.
The child is the entertaining one. You know, this is clearly no one in this room would step to this level, but the Jerry Springer phenomena, you've heard, people have told you that what this Jerry Springer thing was. The whole purpose of Jerry Springer was to push people in a very hindering child point of view and get them to entertain people, which was disturbingly damaging to people, but that's the whole purpose of Jerry Springer and all the other daytime television shows like that, was to trigger that, because it makes good for good television. So now I appreciate, I've taken more of an academic kind of pathological approach in terms of Actrua and how we use it. Most of the stuff, I think we use it in the context, and Tim, I'll get you to add if you can with this, is in leadership, particularly in the LSI, that if you look at the LSI kind of states, there's a nice parallel between parent, child, and adult that can help complement each other. Would that be fair, Tim?
Yeah, and it's consciously simplified, I think, is the way that I've chosen to sort of develop this. So that it's great to actually have all that background knowledge now, which is really good, and I've learned a lot from that. But because this quite often comes out during a circumflex session, so we're all sitting around the mat and we're actually talking about real life interactions, we actually use this as a way to illustrate, first of all, how I might trigger a response in someone else. So if I'm in the parent and we get a childlike response from someone, so well, okay, so what's your 50% in this? How are you creating this situation which is inviting the childlike response? And the same where people might be occupying that childlike space, that passive defensive space. We can use that as a way to explain, well, if you're going to occupy that childlike space, what you're subconsciously doing is you're looking for a parent to come and control you, and you're inviting someone else to step in and become the parent and take that aggressive defensive posture and behave in that way. So it's a good way of explaining how people might actually create situations unconsciously. Yeah. The other really key point is you can see there at the bottom, be the adult in the relationship, because one of the questions that always comes up when we're around the mat is, how do I behave constructively? I don't know what constructive looks like. And we have a long discussion about that. But what it comes down to is, if you want to create a constructive atmosphere in your team and the business, there's only one reliable way to do that, and that's to model it by being constructive yourself and inviting an adult response from everyone around you, and not being pulled into those parent-child relationships, exactly as Gladys Berejiklian did this morning. Obviously, she stayed in that adult space. So it's a bit of a simplified version, but I really appreciate the detail you've gone into there, Miles.
And I find similar. I use this in the truest state is particularly with HSC professionals, frontline supervisors. In how do we change the dynamic and get away from the parent-child dynamic, which is so institutionalized in safety, and become more an adult. And it seems to have a very it's got a transparency and a face validity that frontline leaders and people who don't have, don't like the jargon stuff, they can relate to. Now, last little piece, and this gets very complex and very messy, and I haven't gone into too much for it, but, rackets or transactions happen in context of multiple different transactions and multiple different beliefs. And if you really want to spend the time, you could begin to define what rackets and games. So rackets and games are patterns and routines that are a learned series of unconscious complementary transactions that end up with one player typically feeling disempowered, below the line. And part of this is being aware of that, and then you can choose to be different. So, for example, one of the things a racket that I've not struggled with, but been aware of is as leaving home, leaving the States, or at an early age. The framework that I had whenever I visited my parents was very much a child, a young adult in my late 20s. When I visited back when I'm in my 30s and 40s, what I found we were falling back into that pattern of that, and there wasn't a lot of respect of now that I'm an adult and making decisions in that, and I was getting triggered quite regularly to where it was making the limited time I was visiting home more tense than it needed to be. And by recognizing that, I could choose not to get triggered into that and be more adult than fall back into the child responses that were not helping. Now, I don't know if that's too much self-disclosure, but does that make sense?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in the title of Byrne's book, which was The Games People Play.
Yeah.
Which takes it to that. Yeah. Oh, that's it, is it? Excellent.
Yeah, it's 40 years old now, but it is if you're interested, it is written by a psychiatrist, so it's got a little bit of jargon, but it's a really neat. I've found it very useful both professionally but also personally, and I'm happy for people to borrow it if they like.
I'd actually like to read it if I can, Miles. We can grab it off you. The thing I really like about Byrne's concept of the games people play is that it actually takes it above that subconscious level, in that there are people who will try and manipulate situations for their own benefit. And that it actually gives us, it actually almost gives us permission to say it's okay to understand now that some people do try and manipulate. Not everyone is necessarily pure of intent. So it actually opens that up. This is a way of understanding how we may be manipulated by other people as well, which is a bit of a negative view on the world, but it's also a fairly realistic view on the world as well.
Yeah. for me, to use a truer language, it shows some of the games and situations people create to pull themselves, keep themselves below the line and pull others and create that victim mentality. You know, the whole, I've listed some of the common games like the wooden leg. Now, I think Burns and some of his colleagues were having some chemical enhancements when they come up with some of these names, because I don't know where they came from. But wooden leg, the story they use is that they had a pirate for all of it, but you know, his view, you know, he couldn't hold down a job because of his wooden leg. If it was only because I didn't have this wooden leg, things would be better. Which is basically a racket in a game that justifies not putting action into, you know, being proactive or otherwise. So one of these things that we see it in others, it's hard to see it in ourselves, and part of it is being the adult to turn the spotlight back and go, what is the racket? What is the game? And is that serving me? Easy to talk about, hard to do. So now that's a whirlwind overview and quite a lot of theory thrown at you. We've got a couple more minutes left. Any questions or clarities or anything that's triggered for people?
It's really interesting. Thanks, Miles. You explained it really, really well. I was just thinking, like, when you're talking about manipulation, it's almost like you've got to manipulate by being the adult the whole time. So it's like if someone's parenting you and you're constantly coming back at them with an adult response, in the end it makes them look silly. So it's like, you know, someone's having a go or whatever, and you're just coming back totally calm, like that Gladys did. The Gladys or Glennis? Sorry. Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, just keep it, and if you keep doing that, then you're manipulating them to come down to your level almost, or for the child to come up.
Exactly, Tasha. I used to use this a lot in assertiveness training. So for example, I did some work a long time ago now with some call centers, and the challenge of the call center, no one ever calls you at a call center when they're happy. So when you don't have them in the face, how do you manage that when it's outside of your control? And we talked a lot about that, is that, you know, they come in as either parent, you will do this, or child where they're losing it. How do they stay as an adult and not wear their stuff, the other person's stuff, and not get triggered? And where do they draw the line as well and go, no, that's not acceptable, I'm going to have to hang up on you or whatever.
Yeah.
And
it's so hard to do though, isn't it? Like, you've got to just try and take a step back away. It's like parenting. I mean, when your child is at you and losing control, it's hard not to get like your blood to boil. The
model just gives you a conscious way to go, wait a second, that's not working, here's something different, to where if we don't have something visual to connect with, it's hard not just to react.
Yeah.
I actually find this model one of the more practical ones to, like you say, move from the subconscious to the conscious, where you can, in the moment, use the model to remember, you know, to take whatever action you need to if you're being triggered. Other models take a bit of working, like we talked about the, you know, whether it's coaching models and things like that. That takes a bit more to get into. But this one I found was like almost an instant fix. And when I've used it for people, they come up with an example straight away. Like for me, it's the whole union. I've worked with and against the unions for years. And their whole modus operandi is to either be the child, the victim, or be the parent and tell us what we're doing wrong. And so to continuously be the coolest head in the room, this was a great trigger for that when it's all going down. So I find this one to be a really effective at kind of that frontline leader level.
Yeah, it's really accessible to most everybody.
It's interesting. This is more just an observation question for particularly those who use the model a bit. It's like, I imagine you're actually often not rewarded for being the adult in the conversation. I'm just thinking, even if it's the child in the shopping centre, or, you know, someone's really having a go at you on the phone or in person, just being composed can actually be not a rewarding position.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
And actually, Craig Burns, and he referred to them as strokes, which was unfortunate, I think. But strokes are units of recognition, and he talks about that very thing, is that, you know, there's short-term recognition and long-term, and oftentimes the short-term payoff, you know, supports the hindering racket and game and interaction, and being the adult for the long-term payoff is really hard because the payoff doesn't come till later. And just
you've triggered a thought there. You could even have a look at organizational personality. So, for example, an organization that loves a crisis, so they will leap into the crisis and it's all action, and that's where the reward goes. But that kind of what we used to call a BP silent running, which was just your adult running of an organization, was not rewarded. It's not exciting. It's not adrenaline filled.
I find that oh, sorry, Tim.
No, so go ahead, Miles.
I was going to say, I find exactly that, Nigel. The transactional analysis is a good complementary to other models. It's a good way to apply it. As Tim said about the LSI, yes, we understand the blue, the red, and green. Here's how you do it on a daily, moment-to-moment basis.
Yeah, you could talking about the loving a crisis. You could also tie that into our levels of leadership discussion around dipping down, and you can understand how the parent might get frustrated when things start going wrong, where there's a crisis. And they say, "Oh, just get out of the way. Let me do it. I'll fix it up." And that's where we start to see leaders working below their level, taking the job of people below them, which is rife in pretty much every business we work with, which is cool. That's why we do what we do. But it actually helps to explain that space that we occupy and the impact of us dipping down as well. Because what's the point of me doing the job if mum and dad are going to come and do it for me?
So, any other questions? Two things. I was going to see if there are any other questions. And just for a share, I've got I think it's an 8-page, more academic article that gives the overview of the key things. Would that be of interest to send through? It's about 10 years old, but it's a useful kind of first cut of it if people are interested.
That'd be good, Miles. Thank you.
That'd be good. It's almost language. Language you can attach to. The whole boss. Boss just reeks off parent, doesn't it?
It's particularly hindering parent where leader is more supportive parent, I think.
Yeah.
I can think of an example where I've watched Andrew at play when talking to Tracy Chapman, who, as everyone who's had a conversation with her knows, that she comes in very much with a parental type of approach. And I've certainly witnessed Andrew sitting there talking, you're replying back in a much more adult approach and sort of just calming it down and sort of, taking the emotion out of it and the challenge that comes, the way that she comes at you almost in a challenging type sense. And then Andrew's just gone back quite flat and sort of, with the adult one and sort of, calmed the situation right down.
Thanks, sir. I hadn't thought of that in that context, actually. It was interesting to hear you share that. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of parallel between this and the DISC models as well. I found that there's a complementary kind of interaction between the DISC understanding and transactional analysis as well.
In an example like that, Andrew, sort of a customer service context, do you have a sort of a trigger or thought that you use when someone is sort of coming at you below the line?
Yeah, I think it's also linked, I think, in some ways, to the facilitation methodology. So, when someone attacks you in the front of the room in front of 16 people and it's a deliberate, intentional attack, so that's child normally, it's always how do I respond adult and so maybe the way Sue even said, flatten this out. So take the emotion out of it, play it back. And I think in terms of customer challenges and those, it's always like, I've been in the middle of lots of heated discussions with clients at times, and my primary goal is to maintain a positive relationship with a good outcome, but also not just give away the farm. Sometimes it's like, no, there's a negotiated practice in that too. So I think that's there. So the mindset is always, I want a good outcome out of this, or I want to achieve a more positive impact. So I think that helps move you to adult, because you know, and let's face it, Sue, there's been times when people have been in the office and, you know, the message comes in, you know, an email or this or that, and people go, what the fuck? and then you take the 10 seconds and go and respond. So that's moving to child or parent, depending what you're feeling, and then moving straight into adult very quickly. So I think that's there too.
It'd be so hard to do in the heat of the moment, though, in a conversation, wouldn't it? Like, you just feel, when you're feeling attacked, it's like like you'd have to have a lot of strategies to deflect and just stay calm and come back with a cool, calm response. Like, yeah.
I think, Tash, in that, like, I mean, one of the techniques, I think is relevant for everyone. It's what, when we were doing the sort of advanced facilitation skills, like with clients or even switch on co-facilitators, just a little technique that I always talk to people is you imagine that somebody's attacking you and literally they are attacking you with a knife, a bow and arrow, whatever it is, you know, that, because that's how that feels. You know, we respond like I've been attacked. And the mental image I use, and it was part of my training very on, is, you know, just imagine that as they threw it at you, it just went straight through you and out the other side and didn't hurt you. You actually watch the attack go through and continue past because it's got nothing to do with you. So when you can visualize, oh, well, thanks for throwing that at me and it went through, you then step back and you go, well, why did you choose to say it that way? You can be so calm.
Wow.
Because if you catch it and it hits you, you're triggered, you know, as Miles has been sharing. So that's the mental image I still use that in facilitating, or when I'm in front of an exec team and somebody throws a zinger at you, you know, you don't get triggered. You know, you actually go, I wonder why they're saying that. Try really hard not to get triggered. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Some examples, yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Miles. That was really good.
No problem, guys. All right, well, that's all from me.
Pretty good, Miles.
No questions. Oh, thank you. I'll flick through that article this morning on the Teams if you'd like.
And we're actually trying to put together a few of these videos for using for the associates as well, so they can get across all the different models and different things we're doing in the business, so that they've got a ready reference point. So I'll put it out there for the associates as well.
Cool.
So will you just on that as well? Like, are you going to keep the slides, for instance, somewhere so that we've got access to the presentation, or is?
I'm happy to. It's on my laptop at the moment, but I'm happy to flick it through.
It's really good. It's really good how you did it with the lines going to the different areas and the helpful, hindering, all that half. I thought was excellent to understand that.
Why don't you share the presentation with the paper, Miles?
Yeah, okay, I could do that.
Yeah. Good.
And I'll talk to Wendy and Tash around where on the Q drive is the best way where to save it as well, and I'll make sure it's on this Q drive.
Yeah.
Cool.
It's
Thanks, Miles.
pretty challenging subject in half an hour, sort of to give the balance of theory with the practical. So nice work on that, Miles.
Great job, Miles. Thanks for that.
Do we have a volunteer for just a question tomorrow?
I think that Rachel's volunteered.
Rachel's already volunteered when she left.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Good. All right. Any more? All good.
Tim, I need to speak to you about this QR code stuff.
Oh, okay, cool. No worries. I'll get you on Teams in a minute.
Okay.
Nige, do you want 5 minutes on PowerLink?
Yeah, that'd be good. Thanks.
Okay.
See you, team.
Carl, have a good day.
See you guys. Thanks so much.
Bye.